Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a comparison between the Sony RX10 Mark IV on the left and the brand new RX100 Mark VI on the right. Now, in terms of pricing, of course, the Mark IV, the RX10, has been on the market for a while, $1,700 US dollar price point. The RX100 Mark VI just launched yesterday, July 10th, 2018, and is priced at a little under $1,200 US dollars. Now, these are two very different cameras. Clearly, you can tell one is a bridge style camera, one is a pocket style camera. Both are point and shoot, both have the same 1-inch 20 megapixel sensor, and they have incredibly similar performance, which is why I am comparing them today, and they really aren't that far apart in terms of pricing either. Of course, where they're completely different is portability, usability, and I think the consumer that will gravitate towards either one. And in some cases, consumers will want to have both. And I do think this is, yet again, as I've done with many videos, the RX10 plus RX100 pairing is kind of a traveler's dream because they're getting the best of both worlds without carrying an entire equipment bag. And I wish I was one of those people. I'm not. I still carry the whole equipment bag, as my subscribers know. But again, talking about a $1,700 camera versus a $1,200 camera, but some major differences in spite of the fact that what's under the hood is very similar when it comes to the sensor, and also the fact that we have Zeiss glass. Here we have 24 to 600 millimeters in reach, whereas on the RX100 we have 24 to 200 millimeters in reach. That is where the similarity is really broken, because not only is this a bridge style body, you have a lens that is in some ways magical, is the way I would put it, with the results that come out of the RX10 Mark IV and every RX10 before it, whereas the RX100 Mark VI simply cannot achieve, obviously, 600 millimeters of reach. In the same vein, the Carl Zeiss glass here is still exceptional, f2.8 to f4.5, in such a compact form factor. And then on top of that, from a video perspective, this camera actually has HDR capability when you're shooting 4K video, which to me is an amazing thing to have in any camera, let alone one that can actually reside in your pocket. You do not have that with the RX10 Mark IV, in spite of it having fantastic 4K video and, of course, a fantastic lens in order to utilize that and really turn it into a video camera that is part of what made the RX10 lineup so desirable, besides its incredibly fast glass when it was back, when it was capped at 200 millimeters back at launch, before they extended it in the 3rd gen, and of course now in the 4th gen, and just have improved upon it with the hybrid autofocus system. What you're looking at in many ways with the RX100 Mark VI is a baby version, if you will, of the RX10. Now, not in its present form, because as I mentioned, we have a 600 millimeter lens here. Yes, it's not capable of, the HDR 4K output that the smaller, less expensive RX100 is capable of. But when you consider that the 24 to 200 millimeter range is nearly identical to where the RX10 lineup originally started before the 3rd gen, and now, of course, here in the 4th gen, that's where my thoughts and feelings of the RX100 Mark VI being a miniature version of the original RX10 or even the RX10 Mark II come into play. Of course, bested in many ways, or it does best the RX10 1st and 2nd gen, because we have 4K. And on top of that, we have HDR 4K, something that you would not or do not have on either of those models. Of course, you could always make the argument that the RX10 Gen 1 and 2 had a faster piece of glass, but it's really close enough that, in my opinion, it is now a wash. And again, more importantly, when comparing it to the present day RX10 Mark IV that I have here to its left, again, we do not have HDR. And also, the RX10 lineup used to have a neutral density filter. Anyone who's followed the evolution of this lineup of camera knows the neutral density filter was done away with. The same applies to the RX100. We had an ND filter, we no longer do. So it's just something where comparing these two, obviously, The weight, the form factor of the RX10 is in a completely different category. It's a bridge style camera. Neither of these cameras has access to Sony's Play Memory application store. That was done away with the RX100 Mark V. After that camera, no camera in Sony's entire lineup any longer supported the Play Memories application store. That was put to bed. But again, just to think about that, the RX100 Mark VI basically affords you now what you get, not the form factor, but the capability of the RX10 up until we hit the 200 millimeter mark is very impressive. Of course, 200 to 600, that extra 400 millimeters of reach, you're not going to get out of the RX100 Mark VI. But remember, it's a pocket camera. This is meant to go anywhere. And that's not to say that the RX10 is not meant to go anywhere. It is. But of course, the RX100 should be marketable to a wider audience because of its form factor, in spite of its price point. And that's something I want to address in this comparison as well. Anyone who looks at the two of these and says, well, they're both incredibly overpriced. For the price of this, I can buy an interchangeable lens camera system. For this, I can buy it. That's not who Sony's after. Sony is not interested in the comparison game when it comes to what you could alternatively buy in terms of a completely different concept. What they're interested in is, what can you buy that is like the RX10 or is like the RX100? And over the years, Panasonic has been the only company really to take that on. And even they, with a much lower price point, both regarding their competition for the RX10 as well as the RX100, still cannot populate the sort of sales Sony has been able to. Now, that's not just on branding or Sony being the first to market. It's Sony being the best at what they're doing. And I give full credit to Panasonic. I still own Panasonic cameras. One of my first bridge-style digital cameras was a Panasonic. I still have it. I don't use it, obviously. It's a little bit dated. But again, this is about comparing what for $1,200 is going to come close to the RX100 Mark VI, and the answer is nothing. The only thing that will come close is the RX10 Mark IV, really, in my opinion, and that's, again, with a fixed lens, point and shoot style camera, even though in this case it is a bridge. One clear advantage, though, that the RX10 does have: no overheating with video. It does not have that issue, no 5-minute cap on video recording. Furthermore, the IOs, the ports, input and output. With the RX10, you are granted a microphone jack and headphone jack, whereas with the RX100 lineup, you're limited to what you see below, just the multi-micro USB port as well as the HDMI output. Nothing else. So this is really the big advantage, besides the body style, more customization in terms of the buttons on board that the RX10 lineup has to offer, beyond its physical optical reach with that 24 to 600 millimeter lens. I mean, that's really the big difference. And also comfort. There are a lot of people that will say to me, the RX100 is great, but the ergonomics are terrible. Well, that's why I've had the optional incredibly expensive $15 grip since Sony launched it, because it does make it far easier and more comfortable to hold and use. When it comes to stabilization, they're both in the same world, same realm, but again, it's all about customization. How many buttons does one camera have versus the other? Both have EVFs, both have very competent, actual LCD screens, but again, you have to remember that there are a lot of people that do prefer to have the bridge style over what we have in the RX100. But that's not what I'm really interested in comparing. Again, it's all about the actual output, both in still and video capability inside that 24 to 200 millimeter range. And from what I've seen, having been an owner of the RX10 Mark IV since launch, and now, of course, the RX100 Mark VI, is that they are almost neck and neck inside that 24 to 200 space, which is really amazing, especially when you take into account that this does have HDR 4K video to boot, and really can travel anywhere. Now, in terms of battery life, they don't use the same battery, so you're not going to see the same battery output. You also don't have a hot shoe like you do on the Mark IV RX10. But when it comes to, again, the best compromise of still and video possible, as usual, the RX100 lineup delivers. in that case. I would have liked to have seen a new battery type with the RX100 Mark VI. I've mentioned that in all of my coverage of the RX100 Mark VI. The same will apply to the RX10. I'm hoping that when Sony comes out with the new RX10, that they take on their new battery type that they've implemented in their interchangeable, mirrorless world, which offers so much more than the battery type that's still sitting inside the RX10. But that's something these two cameras share in common, is that Sony hasn't been willing to push the envelope on battery type because, quite frankly, no one is really challenging them on the actual product they're putting forward in itself. So why get too worried about battery life when there isn't even a true competing product? Now, hopefully that changes over time. Hopefully Canon, Nikon, Panasonic, somebody pulls a rabbit out of their hat. But in the meantime, you're still looking at the two best-of-breed style cameras, whether you're looking for bridge or pocket or pocketable capability with the RX100 Mark VI. And I know I said this was a comparison, and it is. I mean, clearly the bridge style is targeting a different user than the RX100. The RX100 would be just as welcome in a novice's hands as a pro's. The RX10 does share that in common with it, but of course anyone who's looking to stay as lightweight as possible is not going to be interested in the RX10, even in spite of its extended optical reach of that 24 to 600 range. So that's where they are completely different. But again, I really had to do this video because the RX100 Mark VI, in my mind, really is a baby version of this camera now, which it always kind of was, but wasn't legitimately, because it had no telephoto capability. I mean, it was always limited to that 24 to 70 range or thereabout. And now the fact that we're up into the 200 millimeter range, it really is another level altogether, and that is what makes it really comparable to the RX10, whereas before I could compare it, but this is as close as we've ever come, especially, as I mentioned earlier, if you compare this camera to the RX10 Mark I or II, where 200 millimeters was the breadth of reach that you had with that camera. And it's quite amazing when you think about that Sony has, in a way, taken that original RX10, added 4K video, granted capped 4K video, but HDR capable, and thrown it into something that you can take anywhere in a pocket. I mean, that is just mind-blowing if you've watched the evolution of Sony's CyberShot RX lineup and covered it the way I have. So that pretty much rounds things out. Again, two fantastic cameras, but I am just still amazed by what the RX100 Mark VI can do. And of course, I expect to see some of that capability, like the HDR, the hybrid log gamma, make its way to the RX10 Mark V when that is eventually released. But again, the Mark VI, very impressed by it. Now we have the best still and best video camera that one can throw in the pocket, and legitimately say video camera, because before, even with the Mark V, that 24 to 70, really not a video camera. Capable of great video, but very limited because of its telephoto range. So that pretty much rounds things out. Again, the RX10 Mark IV, RX100 Mark VI, I think are an incredible pairing if you're traveling. Have this for, all of the tourism. Have this for everything else when you just want to enjoy the experiences that you're having. The RX10 clearly is more about taking the photos that you would with an interchangeable lens system, but without having to carry that with you everywhere, having it all in one package. The RX100 Mark VI maintains its original, or Sony's original, mission statement, which is to give you the best imaging and now really truly video that one can carry in a pocket or bag without any cumbersome accessories, maybe the selfie stick if you decide to pick it up that they launched alongside this, but that's about it. And definitely some spare batteries. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button. And as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.